He had been gone for 24 hours, but the kettle was still warm, and steam hung in the bathroom air. My brother and I thought he had simply left. Then we found the video recording where he stands in our room, looking directly into the camera. At that moment, there was no camera there. I'm Alex Bryant, 28 years old, and I've never considered myself easily impressed. Grew up in an ordinary family in a suburban corner of Massachusetts, work as a video editor for a local TV station, edit small news segments and podcasts, and generally keep to myself. But everything changed when my roommate, Danny Lopez, disappeared last December. He wasn't just someone renting a room. We grew up together, knew each other since 4th grade when his family moved into the house across the street from mine. We'd survived adolescence, college, and our early 20s together, eventually sharing a 2-bedroom apartment in Somerville. Danny was the brother I chose rather than the one I was born with. He vanished without warning. No arguments, no notes, no signs of trouble. Just, gone. It started when I returned home after a night shift editing footage for a documentary series the station was producing. It was around 7 a.m., and I immediately noticed the front door wasn't locked, unusual for Danny, who was borderline paranoid about security after his car had been broken into last year. Inside, everything was in place, his keys on the hook by the door, wallet on the coffee table, jacket hung on the back of a chair. His phone was still charging on the kitchen counter. I figured he'd stepped out to the bodega on the corner, maybe for coffee or breakfast. But when 2 hours passed with no sign of him, concern began to gnaw at me. In Danny's room, everything was arranged as if he'd only gotten up for a minute, intending to return immediately. A half-empty mug of coffee, now cold, sat beside his laptop, which was open to a Reddit thread about unexplained surveillance footage. His Spotify playlist was paused on a song by The National, "Don't Swallow the Cap." It was all so ordinary, and that's what made it unsettling. By noon, I'd called our mutual friends. No one had seen Danny since the previous evening when he'd joined a few co-workers for drinks after his shift at the architectural firm where he worked as a junior designer. According to Liz, one of his colleagues, he'd left around 10 p.m., saying he was tired and had some work to finish at home. He seemed fine, she told me over the phone, concern edging into her voice. Maybe a little quieter than usual, but nothing that raised any red flags. "Do you think something's wrong?" I wasn't sure what to think. Danny wasn't the type to disappear without warning. He was reliable, methodical, the kind of person who made lists for everything and texted when he was running even 5 minutes late. When I tried filing a missing person report, the officer at the station, a broad-shouldered woman with tired eyes, told me they couldn't officially consider him missing for 48 hours, especially since there were no signs of foul play. "Adults have the right to go where they want, Mr. Bryant," she said, sliding a form across the desk. "Fill this out, and we'll look into it once the waiting period is up. In the meantime, check with hospitals and keep trying his friends." I didn't wait. When I got home, I accessed the security system Danny had installed 6 months earlier. We had 2 cameras, one at the main entrance and another in the kitchen. I checked the footage, scanning for any sign of my friend leaving. Nothing. No record of him exiting through the front door. The last video where he appeared was time-stamped 11:11 p.m., December 14th. In it, Danny walks out of the kitchen, looking slightly over his shoulder toward the camera. His expression is tense, his normally relaxed posture rigid. "I'll be back," he says, his voice surprisingly clear. "If anything happens, don't answer." "Don't answer what?" "The door. The phone." I replayed the clip several times, trying to decipher his meaning. It wasn't like Danny to be cryptic. He was direct, sometimes to the point of bluntness. This veiled warning felt foreign coming from him. I continued reviewing the footage, looking for any clue I might have missed. That's when I felt the first real chill. The hallway camera had captured something at 1:23 a.m., more than 2 hours after Danny's warning message. It was him. Walking down the same hallway, but different somehow. His face was blank, almost slack, his movements fluid but somehow mechanical, like a marionette controlled by an unpracticed hand. He passed directly in front of the camera without acknowledging it, then disappeared into the bathroom. The timestamp showed he remained there for precisely 12 minutes before the camera inexplicably cut out for 30 seconds. When the feed resumed, the hallway was empty. My skin prickling, I rushed to the bathroom. It was unoccupied, but the mirror was still fogged, and water in the sink basin was lukewarm. A damp towel hung crookedly from the rack. Someone had used this room recently, within the last hour, judging by the lingering humidity and the water temperature. I returned to my laptop, hands slightly unsteady as I connected our backup hard drive to check if it had captured anything the main system had missed. While searching through the folders, I discovered one I didn't recognize, simply named "dot." A single "d," easy to overlook. Inside was a lone video file with no metadata, no date, no description. My cursor hovered over it for several seconds before I double-clicked, both dreading and needing to see its contents. The video showed our living room from an angle I didn't recognize, as if a camera had been mounted in the corner near the ceiling, opposite the television. But we'd never installed a camera there. I would have noticed, I would have helped set it up. In the frame, I sat on the couch, hunched over my laptop, headphones covering my ears. According to the timestamp, this was recorded 3 days ago, during an evening I distinctly remembered spending alone while Danny worked late. The apartment was silent except for the faint tapping of my fingers on the keyboard and the muffled hum of the refrigerator in the adjacent kitchen. Then, movement. From the darkened hallway leading to our bedrooms, a figure emerged. Danny. But his motion was wrong. It was as if he were moving through a substance denser than air, his limbs trailing microseconds behind his intentions. He approached the back of the couch where I sat, utterly oblivious to his presence. For nearly a full minute, he stood there, staring down at the back of my head with an intensity that made my current self recoil. Then, slowly, deliberately, he turned his face toward the camera, toward the corner where no recording device should have been, and stared directly into the lens. I paused the playback, my breath catching. His eyes were completely black, like holes punched through the fabric of the image, and his normally expressive face was a perfect mask of nothing. No emotion. No recognition. No Danny. I checked the file properties. According to the metadata, it had been created 2 days before Danny's disappearance. But that was impossible. We'd never placed a camera in that location. Disturbed and increasingly frightened, I sent a copy of the video to my older brother, Josh, a cybersecurity specialist living in Chicago. His response was immediate, a phone call rather than a text, his voice tight with concern. "Alex, what the hell is this? Where did you get it?" I explained the situation as calmly as I could, which wasn't very calmly at all. Josh listened without interruption, then told me he was booking a flight to Boston. He arrived the following afternoon, bringing with him a case of specialized equipment that he refused to explain when I asked about it. Metadata can be altered, he told me as he connected my laptop to his own. But visual forgery, the kind that would fool someone with your professional experience, is harder to pull off, especially with continuous footage like this. Josh spent hours analyzing the video, running it through programs I didn't understand. Eventually, he looked up, his face pale in the blue light of the screens. "It's not edited," he said finally. "At least, not in any way my software can detect. But there's something else. The audio, there's a secondary track layered beneath the ambient noise." He isolated the track, enhancing and cleaning it until a voice emerged, faint but unmistakable. "Female. Unfamiliar." The word sent ice through my veins. He remained. "But you were sleeping." 5 words, spoken with a cadence that felt slightly off, as if the speaker wasn't entirely comfortable with English. Josh and I exchanged glances. "Do you recognize the voice?" he asked. I shook my head. Danny didn't bring many people to the apartment. Especially women. He'd been single since his breakup with Monica last spring. Josh nodded, chewing his lower lip, a habit from childhood that only emerged when he was deeply troubled. "There's something else we should check," he said finally. "The attic." Our apartment occupied the top floor of a converted Victorian house, and above us was a small attic space accessible only by a fold-down ladder in the hallway ceiling. Neither Danny nor I had ever gone up there. The ladder was old, the trapdoor secured with a rusty padlock that had been in place since we moved in. "Why the attic?" I asked. Josh gestured to the video still paused on my screen. "The angle of this shot. It's from above, looking down. If there was a camera, and it wasn't mounted on the wall." I followed his logic. "You think someone was filming from the attic? Through the floor? It's worth checking." We found the key to the padlock in a toolbox in the kitchen, a box Danny rarely touched since his idea of home improvement was calling the landlord. The lock opened with a protesting squeal, and the ladder descended shakily, releasing a shower of dust that made us both cough. Josh went up first, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the gloom. I followed, my heart pounding inexplicably hard as I climbed into the cramped space. The attic was mostly empty save for some abandoned furniture covered in yellowed sheets and a few cardboard boxes that looked decades old. Thick dust covered everything, undisturbed except for a clear path leading from the entrance to the far corner. The corner that would be directly above our living room. The floor there had been modified. A small section had been carefully cut away and replaced with what looked like one-way glass, the kind used in police interrogation rooms. From below, it would appear to be an ordinary ceiling panel, but from above, someone could see directly into our apartment. And beside this viewing port lay a digital voice recorder. Small, modern, incongruous among the forgotten relics of previous tenants. Josh picked it up carefully, turning it over in his hands. The power indicator showed it was still running, recording silently. We took it back downstairs, neither of us willing to listen to it in that dust-choked space with its unsettling modification. In the kitchen, under the harsh fluorescent light that suddenly seemed comforting in its normalcy, Josh connected the device to his laptop and extracted the audio file. It was Danny's voice. Breathing heavily, words tumbling out in panicked bursts. "I can't get out. It keeps repeating. He's where I was. I'm inside, but I'm not here. If you find this, don't look. Just don't look." The recording ended with a strange sound, like someone striking the microphone from within, a hollow percussion followed by static. "What does that mean?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "He's where I was." Josh shook his head, his expression grave. "I don't know. But I think we need to take this to the police. Now." We did. We handed over copies of everything, the security footage, the mysterious video file, the voice recording. The detective who took our statement, a serious man named Reeves with salt and pepper hair and eyes that had seen too much, promised to investigate thoroughly. 3 days later, he called. The equipment we'd surrendered had suffered catastrophic data corruption. All files were unreadable. When I protested, offering to provide new copies, Detective Reeves interrupted with practiced detachment. "Look, Mr. Bryant, we've conducted preliminary inquiries. Your friend's passport was used at Logan International the morning after you last saw him. He purchased a one-way ticket to San Diego with his credit card. All signs point to voluntary departure." "That's impossible," I argued. "His passport is still in his desk drawer." I checked. There was a pause, then, "Are you certain about that, Mr. Bryant?" I wasn't. When I hung up and went to Danny's room to look, the passport was gone. But I'd checked that drawer the day after he disappeared. I was sure of it. Josh stayed with me for another week, installing additional cameras and motion sensors throughout the apartment. Nothing unusual happened while he was there. No unexplained sounds, no glimpses of Danny, no strange recordings. It was as if whatever had occurred had been silenced by my brother's presence. The night after Josh returned to Chicago, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Soft, measured steps that paused outside my bedroom door. The cameras were offline, all of them simultaneously disabled despite being on separate circuits. I reached for my phone with trembling fingers and opened the camera app, pointing it toward the door. The screen showed a figure standing in the doorway. Danny, or something wearing Danny's appearance. His skin was pale to the point of translucence, his eyes dark and empty. He stood perfectly still, his head tilted slightly as if listening to something I couldn't hear. I blinked, and the figure vanished, both from my doorway and from my phone screen. When I checked the footage the next morning, there was nothing but an empty hallway. I moved out 2 days later, leaving most of my belongings behind. I relocated to Vermont, renting a cabin near my parents' summer home, telling them I needed space to work on a documentary project. I didn't tell them about Danny. I couldn't bear to see the worry in their eyes, or worse, the disbelief. But distance hasn't brought escape. Sometimes, when I open my laptop, that same file appears on my desktop. Dot. A simple dot. Each time, the video inside is shorter, condensed somehow, but the final frame is always the same, the living room of our old apartment, with 2 figures now visible on the couch. Me, and the entity that was once Danny, sitting side by side, both staring directly into the camera with identical, hollow eyes. Last week, I received a postcard from Somerville. No message, just a picture of our old street. The handwriting on the address was Danny's, but the postmark was dated 3 days after his disappearance. I don't know what happened to my friend. I don't know if he's gone, or if he's something else now, existing in some in-between space I can't comprehend. But I keep replaying his warning in my mind, don't look. I should have listened. If a camera recorded something that wasn't there, does that mean, wasn't there, is just something we failed to see?